Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Our season preview series, continues on. Today we're going to talk about the Mississippi State Bulldogs. A lot of excitement in Starkville. There's always a lot of excitement in Starkville as the baseball season approaches, but this year the excitement's just on a different level. We'll talk about why here in just a minute. Quick thanks, by the way, to Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every Highway to Hoover for the last year or so. Really enjoyed having those guys on board with us and looking forward to more in the future. Mark, we said offline as before we got going here that this is probably the team that you and I could spend the most time on without having to look at notes, without having to really dive deep into it, because this is a team that, I don't know about you, but I've probably talked more about this team than any other team on other people's podcasts. Brian Haydad had me on his podcast with Super Talk recently, to talk about the team. I just at ABCA, I got asked a lot about them, just kind of apropos of nothing. Coaches wanting to know about them. So there's a lot of positive buzz here, Mark. I'm kind of curious if you share in that and what makes you most optimistic about this group.
Yeah, I would echo that. Certainly, there's so much excitement around this season in particular. Part of that is just bringing in Brian O'Connor, right? He's a successful coach who's been at the pinnacle, knows what it looks like. Now he's making the transition into the SEC, and not only is he coming in and going to lay out his blueprint for building a consistent winner, but he brought some players with him, and then he brought some other players from the portal with him, and you got all this influx of talent. And even without those guys, Mississippi State would return a pretty competitive team. But you add those, and people have used the word super team, and that may be a little bit of a stretch, but there's the opportunity if these transfers hit and these returning guys perform, if they continue their ascension, Mississippi State could be as good as anybody in the country, and that shows. We've got them preseason number 4, and it's a team with that kind of upside. Certainly making it to Omaha is not only realistic, but sort of kind of what we expect. I really think that Mississippi State, with what they've got, just pure roster based on past performance and with potential from some of the newcomers coming in, this team's going to stack up with anybody. Now, they're not without questions, and we'll get into that. But I do think there's enough to like that I understand why there's excitement, extra excitement heading into the year, and I share in it. I'm excited to go to Starkville for opening day because that's where I'm heading. It's not to see Hofstra. No offense. It's to see and feel all the excitement heading into this season that just surrounds the program right now.
Shout out to Frank Catalanato, head coach at Hofstra, former big leaguer. So I had them number 1, Mississippi State, not Hofstra, number 1 in my personal top 25. That's how we started this process. We each did our own personal top 25s and, put those numbers together to kind of give us a starting point. I had them number 1, and I admit a lot of it is vibes based. Now you could I think you could make an argument there based on talent. But for me, it's not that I like Mississippi State's roster more than LSU's, more than UCLA's, etc. It's that I just kind of think that Brian O'Connor in this spot is the best possible person to have at this point in time. First of all, he's going to be re-energized. I don't know that he needed it because Virginia was doing just fine. But how can a new job like this, when you've been somewhere for 20 years and it's kind of been a lot of the sameness, and you got to the pinnacle with that program, there just comes a time where a new challenge can be good for you. And I think that's kind of where he was probably at. And so this obviously is a very different challenge. But the biggest thing for me is that personality wise, I think he is exactly the right person for Starkville, where Brian O'Connor is one of those people that if you look at him in the dugout during a game, his facial expression is not going to change at all. You're
Mhm.
going to have no idea whether they're up 10 or down 10, or, if he thinks the umpiring has been great or been horrible. Like, he's just going to be pretty even keeled.
Yeah.
And I think you need that there. Starkville, if anybody listening to this doesn't need us to tell them, but Starkville, when it comes to baseball, well, I guess all sports actually, but baseball in particular, is a fishbowl.
Yeah.
When you're playing well, when you're coaching well, it's the absolute best place to be doing that in college baseball. But if you're not playing well, if you're not coaching well, if the results aren't there, it can be kind of a difficult place to exist
Yeah.
because it is a little bit of a pressure cooker. So I just think he's obviously been in a lot of big games. He's not coached in a place that has the pressure of Mississippi State, but he knows what big games and what big pressure games feel like. So I don't think it's going to be that big of an adjustment for him to be in this role. So we'll break down the roster here over the next however long we do this podcast. But for me, so much of why I'm high on them is just kind of the vibes of, hey, they kept the core together, like you mentioned. They brought back a ton of guys that would have made them competitive regardless. They brought in some guys who have a history of winning at Virginia, a guys with history of being productive at Virginia. And while you're right, it's not quite a super team. I do think there's probably just a lot of positivity in that clubhouse right now. So let's talk about some of the individual position stuff, Mark.
Mhm.
What do you make of? Let's start on the pitching staff. What do you make of this unit? Because it seems like the general consensus that I think is correct is that, look, there's a great deal of certainty in the lineup in terms of not just who the key pieces are, but how well they're going to perform.
Yeah.
But the pitching staff is a little bit more of a question mark, I think, on paper for most people. So where do you land on what you can expect on the mound?
Well, you certainly have. I mean, they lost the entire rotation, so you're coming in and you're going to have people who have not done it, at least for Mississippi State in those roles. Ryan McPherson has the look of a potential star. I mean, the stuff's incredible. It's he's a Team USA guy. He if he is indeed the Friday guy, which that was the indication coming out of the fall, then stuff wise, I mean, he's going to match up. The question is going to be he hasn't been a starter before, at least not at this level, and certainly not matching, a Hunter Elliott on Friday night, right? That's a tall ask for anybody. Is he ready to do that and not just do it for the big game, but do it week after week? And that's going to be where I'm interested to see. But he's not alone. I mean, Charlie Foster is a guy last year came out had a really good fall, entered this season excited. I actually saw him pitch at Southern Miss last year, but then he got injured and just he kind of got back in the flow late. Well, it's almost like a wasted year, but he did get just a taste of experience. But he's a guy who looks like will be in their rotation again, or for the first time. And now that he's healthy, he could be a real difference maker because it's real stuff as well from the left side. And then you have Tomas Valencius. I mean, that's a guy at Virginia who was, he's been in their weekend rotation. He has experience starting, unlike the other two. And when I saw him against Florida State, he looked really good. Now, speaking to O'Connor later in the fall, he mentioned that he wasn't like that every day. Which if he was, he's a Golden Spikes winner. But he doesn't have to be like that every day. But you see it's in there, and if they can unlock that, then that gives them a really good trio. But it doesn't stop there because I think if you only had those three guys and the pressure was really on these unproven guys at this level to perform, then there would be a little more trepidation. But they have people with real stuff behind them. I mean, you look at like Dane Burns and Duke Stone, Ben Davis is a guy who's real stuff. He could end up, he could start, he could close, he could do a variety of things. Tyler Pitzer, another pitcher, South Carolina, didn't really pitch a ton over his 2 years there. He had some moments, but had a great summer, and he's going to have a key role. And we haven't even talked about the most heralded freshman in to come to college. Jack Bauer, it's 102, 103 from the left side. As he matures and develops and lands his secondary stuff, I mean, that could be a real difference maker because you just don't see that kind of velo. But the good news is they don't need him to come in and be a guy right away. He can come in and pitch midweek relief and figure things out because he's a anything they get out of him at this point is a luxury, and you hope that you build, and then by the stretch run, you've got a true weapon. And I think that's the thing when I look at Mississippi State on the mound is there's so many options that certainly all of them are not going to come through, but there are enough of them that they can absorb it and some underproduction or an injury or whatever negative happens because they just have enough depth to withstand it. And that to me is gives me more confidence that this is a team, despite not having those trusted returnees, that they're going to be able to excel and finish near the the top of the polls once again.
Yeah, that's where I kind of come down on the pitching. You mentioned they just have so many options, and I mentioned this. So for those who listen to the Top 25 podcast and this podcast, excuse me for repeating myself, but my big thing with the pitching staff is that yeah, we can nitpick and say, well, Ryan McPherson really hasn't, he hasn't been a starting pitcher at the SEC level, and we can nitpick Thomas Valencius and be like, well, okay, he pitched well in spots, but it was a little bit up and down last year. Virginia and the ACC is not quite as strong as the SEC, and we could go down the line and nitpick
Hmm.
everybody. But when we'd have to name so many pitchers that by the end of it, it's like, well, some subset of these guys are going to be great because they're all talented and
Yeah.
they're not all gonna fall on their face, right? Like that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. Like
Hmm.
you give me 10, 12 guys with the kind of stuff they have, and all you got to do is find 6 or 8 to really
Yeah.
feel good about it. I'm gonna bet on them finding 6 or 8.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned Ben Davis, and I think that was a good call out. Because I think this is emblematic of kind of why I'm so big on Mississippi State this preseason is that, he's a guy who turned down real money in the draft.
Hmm.
And I think with pitchers, often we look at guys that turn down money in the draft and they come back and we say, oh, well, he's going to come back because he wants to be a starter, or he's going to come back because he was injured for 2/3 of the year and didn't do everything he could do. Well, I mean, Ben Davis was a reliever last year and was really good. And he turned down real money to come back and basically be the same thing.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what really kind of rocket fuels building a pitching staff or just in general building a team when you have guys that had real opportunities to move on and do other stuff that decide they want to come back and just kind of be themselves again in a place. So, if he had decided to sign, that's a big hole at the back of the bullpen. And now you've got a real decision to make on a guy like McPherson, for example, where it's
Hmm.
like, oof, we could start him, but man, as a closer, we kind of already know that he'd be awesome.
Hmm.
But because Ben Davis is there, you don't have to have that debate. Now, could McPherson end up in the bullpen? Yeah, of course. He could still end up in the bullpen, but it's not going to be a debate out of the chute because they know, well, we have Ben Davis there as a little bit of a security blanket. So
Yeah.
that I feel like that's just a huge turn there to get him back to campus. And also a little bit of a security blanket is a lineup that is going to mash. And I think we can go into the season with a pretty high level of confidence that this is a lineup that's going to mash. It's led by Ace Reese, who has to be on any list of preseason SEC Player of the Year
Yeah.
candidates. Like that's just where he's at. Hit over 400 in SEC play last year, which I think was a fact that outside of Starkville probably didn't get acknowledged as much as you would think that he hit so well in SEC play. Over 400 in SEC play is kind of unheard of. Like it's a
Right.
very rarefied air of hitter. Like you better be Dylan Cruz, if
Yeah.
you're going to be hitting 400 in SEC play. And Ace Reese is not Dylan Cruz, but he's a pretty doggone good player and showed it last year. But for me, that's just the start. And I'll turn it over to you, Mark. But for me, that
Hmm.
he's the starting point. But there's a lot more to this lineup than just him.
Yeah, well, let's start with Reese. I mean, he missed the fall. He had I guess it was a foot injury, and had surgery, and started to come back towards the end of the team drills, and they expect him to be able to be full go. The concern was he wasn't great defensively at third base last year, and then missing the fall. What does that look like? Can he ramp up in time to to give them what they need defensively at third? His bat's in the lineup regardless. But when you start there, I mean, you put him in three hole and shuffle the many candidates around him. You're in such a good spot. But they have another returnee, Noah Sullivan. Yeah, he was primarily a DH. He pitched some last year as well. Probably not going to pitch as much this year because they just have so much more depth on the mound. But he could play DH again. He could play first. They've even run him out in the outfield a little bit just to for more flexibility. It'll be interesting to see. Again, he's another guy that needs to play, needs to be in the lineup. So you've got that, and then you've got. Now I feel like they're question marks. They lost both catchers from a year ago. So Kevin Milewski is the Seton Hall transfer is going to be in at. He's probably going to be the starter, although there's plenty of competition back there. Uh, Andrew Raymond, another transfer they brought in, along with Sean James, who's also an infielder. He played quite a bit at second base and has a chance to start there, but he's probably their best defensive catcher. So if for certain matchups, you don't be surprised if you see him back there. So how does that shake out behind the plate? Jackson Owen is a returnee who could also be in the mix there. So they've got depth, which it will be a theme as we continue to rattle off names here. The other question is shortstop. Lost their shortstop. What is who are the candidates there? Certainly Ryder Woodson, the NC State transfer, had a tremendous fall and left the fall as the leader there. Also, Drew Wires, the Bryant transfer, I think he hit 400 for Bryant last year. He's in the mix there. Could also play some at third or second. And then another name to throw out, Garrick Fry, who's a returnee, he could end up being second base. Remember last year he was kind of in left field. He's a really good athlete and worked quite a bit at second base. And don't be surprised if he ends up as the starter at second. So you've got all this positional flexibility to help fill some of the questions that this team has. The questions I don't have are going to be offensively. They're going to put 9 guys that they can really swing the bat. The questions for them will be defensively. How rangy are they? Other than in center field, where Aiden Teal's gonna roam out there. I do think that the rest of the defense is something that we'll have to wait and see what it looks like. Uh, but I don't think they're going to be it's going to be problematic. I think it's more of a range thing because maybe not as athletic as some of the other teams in the league, but boy, they're going to make up for it in the batter's box.
The outfield in particular is interesting to me because you've got Aiden Teal in center field. The likely left fielder is Bryce Chance,
Hmm.
who is never going to be the most exciting guy on the field, but like you look at every year, he just finds his way into the lineup, even though he's never necessarily the centerpiece of things. He
Hmm.
just always kind of grinds his way into the lineup. James Nunnally is also out there, one of the Virginia transfers, had a great fall. It looks like a potential breakout player and had a pretty nice year last year at Virginia. So not like a guy who's totally unproven. Noah Sullivan could theoretically move to the outfield if they need another
Hmm.
DH spot. Um, Reed Stallman, not
Reed
Andrew.
Stallman, yep.
I don't know who
Hmm.
Andrew Stallman is, but Reed Stallman
Hmm.
was an outfielder who hit 11 home runs last year. Like he could
Yeah,
be in the outfield. And oh, by the way, freshman Jacob Parker is also
yeah.
in this mix. And if he just immediately takes to college baseball, it's going to be hard to keep someone as talented as he is out of the lineup. Because no disrespect to some of the aforementioned players, but when you talk about raw talent, he's going to take a back seat to very few in this lineup. So, they have the luxury of being able to give him time if he needs it. But if
Hmm.
he doesn't need it, I don't think they're going to be shy about inserting him into the lineup and giving him a chance to play. So the outfield could really be 6 or 7 deep of guys that could play out there. And they probably feel pretty confident with any number of arrangements out there. So on a really deep lineup, really talented lineup, that's the position group that is kind of most intriguing to me because it strikes me that there's just a lot of different permutations out there.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those teams, and they certainly aren't the only one, but they're just so deep that waiting to see that lineup being announced every day is going to be kind of one of the hidden joys for us seam heads as we figure this thing out, and who's going to end up where, and who's getting the opportunity today, and where are they in the lineup, and oh wow, he's in this position today. This is going to be one of those kind of teams that just a kind of a hidden joy to follow based on just how it all shakes out.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. That's a good place to put a bow on this one, because I think that's exactly right. A team that we're both very high on, very excited to see on the field here. And by the time you're listening to this, just a couple weeks. So excited to see what it turns out to be on the field. That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. Want to thank Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover for the last calendar year. I want to thank Mark, as always, for joining me. I want to thank you, the listeners, for listening. Stay with us as we do a preview episode for all 16 teams in the SEC, and we roll forward all the way up to opening day. So thank you for listening here, for continuing to listen, and for going back and listening to the episodes that are already out there. We appreciate all of your support.